Well, welcome everybody. My name is Ann Aversa and I'm this year's president. If anybody needs a listening device, I think the AV team can hand you one, so just raise your hand. Make sure you checked in at the front desk. I've got a few announcements. The first one is that the community grants applications are still open until October 10th. So if you're interested, contact Jane Scourge, the community grants chair. In the October meeting, we're going to do the nominating committee nominations. So if you are interested in serving on the running for nominating committee, please contact Leslie Wachtel. And then I hope you're all beginning to save your valuable items to donate to the estate sale. And if you've got any questions or you want to get more involved, please contact Michelle Slatala, Stephanie Dorfman, and Patty Flynn Boston. We've got 3 more events in October. The first is the League of Women Voters webinar on Thursday, October 10th. It's a terrific way to learn about all the ballot issues, and it's bipartisan or unbiased opinions. It's terrific. So that's a webinar. And then on October 17th, which is going to be the 3rd Thursday of the month, we're going to have our October Home Day Lunch. It's going to be the Blue Zones Project by Nicole Warwick. And then on Thursday, October 24th, we're going to have the Fall Fashion Show. Kathleen Taylor's our chair, and Eileen Fisher is going to be the clothing designer. So I hope you all buy your tickets soon. I want to do some thank yous. Today's guest tea chairs are some old friends of mine, Becky Loback and Julie Asiano. Please give them a big round of applause. Our past president greeters today are Janice Bazenko and Susan Johnson. Hospitality, Lydia Mirovich and Patty Mellon. Check-in, Lori Bachman. AV team, Sherry Yoshizu and Bonnie Freiberg. Flowers, Lynette Dennison and Jennifer Berry. And there's a few notes about those, the little small arrangements on the table. You can just take home, but please leave the containers. There's one large orchid in the back for $40. And then there's some individual orchids that are in the front hall for $10 each. You pay Pauline Nakamuli in the back at the end of the tea. I'd like to thank the guest tea volunteers, Pat Emrich, Peggy Riley, Heather Wegman, Beth Stafford, Terry Seligman, Karen Polite, Beverly Rogers, Dagmar Zakim, Janet Anderson, Tracy Houghton, Maria Rudeman, Karen Pelham, and Lauren Klein. Please give them a round of applause. I've got a couple more tips about the tea itself. So the tea actually begins at 2. So the tea was brought to the tables a little early, so wait until 2. There's, the milk and all that stuff is not out yet, so the tea is 2 o'clock. And then afterwards, if you can help clear the tables, there will be a table that will be right in front of the kitchen doors that you can just put everything on at the end of the tea. We don't have a lot of cleanup volunteers for today. So thank you so much for all of that. And now I'm going to do a little introduction for today's tea. So last year at this guest tea, I was sitting with Melissa Kurtz and beginning to think about the programming for this year. And for those of you who are new members and guests, during the pandemic, Melissa and Lynda wrote a book about the history of the Outdoor Art Club called Ladies to the Rescue. At the time, we didn't have a speaker program on the calendar focused on their work, and so I thought it was long overdue to have them come and speak to our club. So when I mentioned the idea to them last year, they told me they're working on a second book about our club and that they would love to share their research with us. When I think about the future of our club, I think 50 years from now, the 2 members that will be remembered in our history from our generation are going to be Melissa Kurtz and Lynda Chittenden. Because of their historical research and discoveries about the founding members and origin of our club. I'd like to give you a little bit of background on both of these ladies. Melissa Kurtz joined the Outdoor Art Club 17 years ago. She's been active with our archives since she joined and became chair 10 years later. For 4 years, she was on the board as membership director. For the past few years, she's handled reservations for our luncheons, teas, and Ways and Means events, as well as greeted you at event check-in. This year, she's taken on the webmaster role. During this time, she's been on numerous committees, such as Parliamentary Standing Committee, New Member Committee, and Nominating. Not surprisingly, her working career was in airlines and commercial real estate as a database developer. One of her main interests is researching family history, which led her and Lynda to discover the stories of our founders and early Outdoor Art Club members. With that information, Lynda was able to write and publish Ladies to the Rescue. Lynda has been a member even longer. She joined in 2001 after 35 years of teaching, 30 of them in the Mill Valley School District. In the Outdoor Art Club, she's happily been a very active member, co-director, and co-chair on many committees, including programs, nominating, community impact, and archives. In 2012, she created our first handbook, and she is currently the content editor of the newsletter. Her interest in Outdoor Art Club history led to a series of brief founder profiles in the newsletter, and the 2020 pandemic gave her the time to absorb all of Melissa's research, which inspired her to write Ladies to the Rescue. Lynda does not identify as a writer, but as a teacher, eager to make accessible to all of us the rich history of the early women who founded and shaped Mill Valley's Outdoor Art Club. Please welcome Melissa Kurtz and Lynda Chittenden.
When Melissa and I finished Ladies to the Rescue, I remained intrigued by those women. I had written a story of how they had founded our Women's Club and together greatly influenced our town, but I was still interested in learning more about the individual women themselves. Where to begin? An obvious place was right there in our founders' room. We don't know when the first list of OAC presidents was done, but it was obviously created to bestow honor and help us remember. Care was taken. Names are listed in calligraphic script, capital letters embellished with gold leaf, but what does this tell us beyond the obvious? Most of these women were married, and we know the years of their presidency. If a first name is there, for example, Flora Reynolds, it's because she was a widow. But I am so grateful to the questionable journalistic ethics of the time. Local newspapers whose reporting was not always objective, and which often delighted in scandalous details. They were the era's social media. And now, a century later, it's all online and accessible. My newest book, Ladies of Substance, will be in our archives, available to read on your own. But this afternoon, I want to introduce you to 3 memorable past presidents. Their pictures are on frames on your table, thanks to Lynette. Okay, now, one of these ladies will make you proud. Another will make you smile with affection. Another might make you question some of her choices, but all were women you will be glad to know more about.
Carrie Bridge lived from 1863 to 1940. She was our 3rd president from 1905 to 1907. You'll note she served 2 terms.
Now, the only photograph we have of Carrie Edith Howard Bridge, that projects determination, right? Even intimidation. Looking back at us from over a century ago, we can conclude that this was quite likely a woman not easily ignored, one who you could immediately believe would have been an important part of an organization focused on having a say in her community. Born in San Francisco in 1863, records suggest a privileged childhood, despite the fact that when she was only a baby, her 37-year-old sea captain father died from injuries sustained in a carriage accident. When in her 30s, Carrie began to keep company with Henry Stewart Bridge, a man that today would be labeled a player. He was a co-founder of Tiburon's Corinthian Yacht Club and society pages in San Francisco newspapers tell of yachts spending days sailing the waters between Vallejo and Napa, and that one of their passengers on Henry's yacht was a Miss Carrie Howard. Carrie and Henry married in 1888, but there was no society wedding reported. Plus, census records reveal that their first child was born 2 months later. Now, does this suggest, Bonnie, does this suggest that her parents had perhaps pressured Henry into a shotgun marriage? Or perhaps 29-year-old Carrie, who records reveal became a bit of an independent player herself, she just took time to make up her mind. The couple settled in Mill Valley, built a home, and records indicate they both became involved in the biggest business in town, real estate. Okay. This history room photo is labeled as showing the Emporium department store's delivery wagon, but I include it to show all the real estate signs. A startling number of records reveal that Carrie Bridge was perhaps as involved in real estate as her husband, maybe more involved. In listings of transfers of property deeds after the 1890 auction, the people named are, of course, mostly men. Occasionally, a woman would be reported as involved in a deed transfer. But when Carrie sold some property, which she often did, she was not listed as Mrs. H.S. Bridge, but as Carrie E. Bridge. Startling but not surprising is evidence of what Carrie subsequently did with one property she had purchased. Discovered by Melissa is a copy of the document shown here, announcing to one and all that Carrie E. Bridge was the owner of Castle Park, a large tract of land. This legal document says that there were no liens for unpaid taxes on this property, and
she has caused said tract of land to be surveyed and subdivided, and portions thereof to be laid out in 112 lots for the purpose of sale.
Entrepreneurial Carrie Bridge, wife, mother of 5 children, was also a property developer. Now, Melissa's words spoken here and throughout are exact quotes from primary sources. Henry and Carrie Bridge are listed as one of 4 couples who in 1904 purchased the most shares of the OAC's Club Building Association sale of stock that enabled the women to build their own clubhouse. Perhaps the marriage did begin as a shotgun wedding, but the bulk of evidence suggests it grew into a strong union. But we must remember that in 1905, Carrie was the current OAC president. During her term, the OAC joined the California Federation of Women's Clubs, Co-founded in 1900 by Laura Lyon White, this organization, along with the National General Federation of Women's Clubs, worked to further the establishment and development of women's clubs throughout the state. Both organizations advocated important progressive goals.
Issues affected by the GFWC: suffrage for women, family planning, public kindergartens, juvenile court systems, an 8-hour workday, legislation to ban child labor, pure food and drug legislation, anti-lynching legislation, and public parks.
In addition, it's fascinating to discover that during Kerry's presidency, the OAC in this room formally debated a complex civic issue. At their September 1905 business meeting, they formally debated the resolution
that public utilities be owned and operated by municipalities.
as reported by the San Francisco Call.
This absorbing event brought forth excellent points well upheld.
The affirmative side
Contended that the repository of all governmental power is in the people. We have a right, who have a right to demand that utilities of a public nature should be under the government's management.
The negative side
Argued that public utilities under municipal ownership would create political machines in every large city.
discussion and a decision followed for the affirmative. Now, it's impressive that this civic issue was seriously debated by women who at the time could not vote. They also affirmed this resolution at a time when local water services were being provided by small, profit-making enterprises run by men, a few of whom the debaters probably knew quite well. After a 19th century history of San Francisco's discrimination against its Chinese residents, plus an early 20th century time when too many Americans saw Asia as a source of yellow peril, the Bridge family took part in a remarkable adventure countering those prejudices. The San Francisco Chamber of Commerce sponsored an Oriental relationship excursion. A Pacific Mail steamship left San Francisco in October of 1921 with 130 passengers to visit the Far East. Now, these passengers were not on a tourist cruise, but what was the purpose of this voyage? A local newspaper described the trip as
the first of its kind ever sent out by an American community or trade organization.
For 3 months and sailing 19,000 miles, Carrie and Henry were part of a group of Bay Area citizens cultivating friendships with commercial and social leaders in Honolulu, Yokohama, Kobe, Shanghai, Hong Kong, Singapore, Saigon, Jakarta, and Manila. When the ship sailed, picture this, when the ship sailed back through the Golden Gate, it was extravagantly welcomed. After leaving an Alcatraz quarantine station, the returning ship sailed toward the ferry building down an aisle formed by welcoming tugs and launches.
The mighty siren of the ferry building sent out a blast that let California and the world know that the first big trade mission sent out to visit foreign neighbors by any city in the world aboard a modern passenger liner has returned triumphant from a voyage halfway around the world.
The Bridge family experienced a trauma in 1929 when a great fire burned much of Mount Tam and threatened the town. Begun at the head of Blythedale Canyon, the fire swept down Middle Ridge and seemed likely to burn all that had been built since the town's founding. The bridge home on Blythedale Canyon, in Blythedale Canyon, was threatened as sparks and flaming embers rained down on the roof from homes burning above Middle Ridge. Anticipating the destruction of their home, the family buried their silver and an heirloom mantel clock in the yard. But late in the night, almost miraculously, the wind shifted, forcing
the wind to release its prey,
and the downtown was saved. Records vary, but at least 117 homes were destroyed or significantly damaged. The bridge home at 186 Corte Madera Avenue, built in the late 1890s by Harvey Kleiss, was saved and still stands today. It was in Berkeley that Henry died in October of 1937. Lengthy, detailed obituaries were published on both sides of the bay.
Henry S. Bridge, 77, for many years identified with financing operations in southern Marin, died Tuesday at his Berkeley home. One of the first residents of Mill Valley when that district was opened in 1890, and a charter member of the Corinthian Yacht Club. Henry Bridge played an active part in affairs hereabouts some years ago.
This obituary concluded by naming his son and each of his 4 daughters as survivors, but described his wife only as an unnamed widow. Carrie Edith Howard Bridge herself died 3 years later, but no obituary of her was published, although she had definitely played an active part in affairs hereabouts some years ago.
Beulah Barber lived between 1867 to 1944. She was the OAC's 8th president in 1913 to 1914.
Now I know what you're thinking. Oh, I know about her. She must be the mother of that boy whose name that's how we got Linden Square. That's right, she was. In this familiar photo, that's Beulah Barber on the far left. Most of the women are wearing gardenia corsages because the photograph was taken at an August Founders Day event. But Beulah doesn't have one because she wasn't a founder. She was, however, in the early 1900s, an active member of the OAC, as well as a prominent town citizen. Little is known about Beulah Sophie Plummer Barber's early life other than she was born in upstate New York in 1867. The family came west probably in the early 1890s and settled in San Francisco. In May of 1895, she married Bryant Hill Barber, a native Californian. The local paper reported that the newlyweds left
on an old-fashioned wedding trip in a carriage through the Santa Clara Valley and Los Gatos Hills.
Beulah and Bryant began their family life in San Francisco. Bryant worked as an electrical engineer, and Beulah was soon the mother of 2 boys. By 1910, small print, the family had increased in size, having added 2 more children, and they'd moved to Mill Valley. They built a home on Hillside Avenue, which would be their home for the rest of their lives. The framed list of OAC presidents cites 1913 as the year of Beulah's election. Actually, she stepped into office the year before, when in the midst of our 7th president, Catherine Ruddick's term, was interrupted by the suicide of her husband, a newly elected town trustee. He hung himself in Muir Woods. Now, I'm not going to tell that story today because it's too sad, but all the poignant details of Catherine's life are in chapter 7 of Ladies of Substance. Much was accomplished during Beulah's presidency. For example, Many books were gathered and added to the collection of the newly built Carnegie Library. In Carrie Bridges' story, we were reminded of the devastating 1929 fire, but in 1913, fire had also threatened the town. In her president's message at the end of her term, Beulah wrote dramatically of the club's involvement in that crisis.
For when the fire swept over our mountain on July 6th, the call came for women to help, and for 5 terrible days and nights, they worked feeding the brave men who were fighting to save our town from the flames. Later, when there was need of a place to put exhausted and injured men, our clubhouse was immediately opened and turned into a temporary hospital. More than one poor lad, as he tossed in pain and weariness on his cot in our cool, vine-covered porch, blessed the women who gave them so peaceful a shelter. Our own Miss Walsh was the efficient nurse in charge under the Army surgeon. As a result of the fire, it became apparent that something must be done to keep our canyons and trails free from the debris by the picnickers.
Well, the chair of the forestry department was Agnes, took the matter in charge and collected data from other towns similarly located. And with the consent of the club, went to the town trustees with a proposition to build fire pits within which debris could be periodically burned and not allowed to collect and again become the source of the fire. In the early years of Europe's Great War, Beulah's oldest 2 sons were attending Tam High. But of all of the Barber children, it is their second son we know more about. Lytton Barber graduated from Tam High and turned 19 in May of 1917. As was later written about him,
fired with a desire to see active service overseas, Lytton Barber enlisted in the Army immediately after he had reached the minimum age requirement.
his enlistment was celebrated and reported in the local paper.
Young friends give him a happy send-off. Last Wednesday evening, a surprise party given for Lytton Barber, who left for Camp Lewis the following morning. A memory book containing autographs and Kodak pictures of the guests were presented to Mr. Barber, who was delighted to receive this souvenir from his friends. Mr. Barber enlisted some time ago in the Signal Corps, but he also took an examination for the aviation service, which he was notified by telegram this week has been favorably acted upon. Consequently, though he has gone to Camp Lewis, he expects to be called to the aviation service in a few weeks.
Lytton Barber left home for Camp Lewis, no doubt full of dreams of becoming a pilot. He was probably imagining that after receiving his training, he would be flying above French battlefields. However, tragically, it was not to be. On the 30th of November in 1917, just 11 days after arriving at Camp Lewis, this boy, Lytton Barber, died. Recorded causes of death vary. One stated meningitis, another implied he died of the then worldwide influenza pandemic. Within weeks of learning of the loss of this first Mill Valley soldier to this war, the town's Board of Trustees adopted a resolution officially naming Mill Valley's new plaza Lytton Square. Beulah had lost one child, but she still had 3 others to raise. After 1917, Beulah continued not only her community activities, but also pursued her intellectual interests, particularly her literary ones. She began a book club in which she would be active for the rest of her life. A 1939 item in the local paper attests to Beulah, now in her mid-70s, having been an active reader and book club leader for decades.
The Mill Valley Book Club complimented Mrs. B.H. Barber with a handkerchief shower at their Tuesday luncheon.
Over a dozen members
Were present to hear Mrs. Barber's review of John Steinbeck's Grapes of Wrath.
Now, during those many years, the paper often reported on the doings of the Mill Valley Book Club. Now, these women not only reviewed and discussed individual novels, but in 1917, they ambitiously reported that they intended to enter into
a comprehensive study course. Plans were made to trace the various literatures back to their origins and follow their gradual development from primitive stages, finally reaching modern times.
Clearly, this was not a book group that met for gossipy discussions about the characters in chick lit novels. An account of their progress on this challenging study course was later reported in the paper.
All present were keenly interested in the program arranged for the day. Continuing the general survey of different literatures from various countries, the early writings of China and India were discussed.
Specifics: Ethelwyn Morris shared translations of early Chinese verses. Carrie Kleiss
gave a very extensive and instructive account of Buddha and writings of that time.
And Eva Finn's
account of Brahmanism was listened to with great interest.
Let us pause a moment here and appreciate not only the serious depth of preparation that the individuals made for this particular book club meeting, but also be astounded at how they managed to do so without the internet. They no doubt made use of the town's 5-year-old public library, an institution they had helped establish. After retirement, Bryant Barber opened a small business in Mill Valley, which he advertised weekly in the Mill Valley Record. Each week, the hanging sign logo at the top of the ad remained the same, but the text each week differed, offering a wide variety of services. This one is a charming example and makes it easy to imagine a cozy workshop where this affable man, a self-named professor of odd jobs, welcomed anyone and everyone with an item to be fixed, or perhaps with only a desire to chat. We can assume Bryant Barber wrote the text for his own ads and can appreciate how this century-old newspaper scraps, words that have journeyed from yellowed news clippings to microfiche to digital storage, now enable this man's humor and charm to be seen all these years later.
The workshop has gone into the real estate business and now offers cozy bungalows for birds, finished in gay colors or those to suit the color scheme of your house and garden. They are sure to find tenants, as these birdhouses can be rented for a song.
The workshop ads often included the availability for purchase
of potted plants and ferns available at less than city prices.
This suggests to me that Beulah Barber was also involved in her husband's business, for she had great plant knowledge and a keen interest in ferns. An article in the paper describing a program sponsored by the club's garden section reported that
Mrs. Beulah Barber brought a large, beautiful maidenhair fern, the direct descendant of one which came to her 30 years ago.
Now, the photo here is not Beulah's maidenhair fern, but one of mine, and every time I admire it, I think of her. In April of 1944, 77-year-old Beulah Barber died 15 years after Bryant's death. Her obituary reminded readers that Mrs.
Barber was one of the earliest presidents of the Outdoor Art Club and was for many years a member of the Mill Valley Book Club, Mrs. Barber was president of this club at the time of her death. Mamie Jacobs lived from 1862 to 1938. She was the OAC's 9th president from 1914 to 1915.
Despite researching the life of Mamie Irene Neely Jacobs and learning enough to suggest that this was a woman who kept her eyes open to opportunity, a number of questions about the OAC's 9th president remain. However, I'm confident hers was a life without the kind of shattering tragedies experienced by Catherine Ruddock and Beulah Barber. In fact, the information discovered about Mamie suggests a degree of intentionality and independence in a woman born in a Sierra gold mining camp, but who ended up an accepted member of early 20th century society in San Francisco and Mill Valley. Mamie's father was an unsuccessful miner who worked as a musician and bartender in camp saloons. She was born in 1862 in the genuine boom town of Volcano. According to Wikipedia, just one of Volcano's proud claims is that it was the site of the first legal hanging in Amador County. An additional bit of information is that this historic town claims to have been the home of California's first circulating public library. So presumably, our Mamie was well acquainted with books. Thus, throughout her childhood, perhaps she had experienced their capacity to plant dreams and enlarge the mind. I think this because years later, Mamie was a member of Beulah's book club. In 1862, living in Sacramento, only 19 years old, Mamie married. The marriage lasted 7 years. Now, that husband was not Mamie's Mr. Right, although he fathered her only child. At some point before 1889, Mamie divorced that husband, and now 27 years old and living in San Francisco, she married Elijah Morris Thomas, a widower with 2 children, a man 20 years older than she, and who had been married already twice before. Now, Mrs. E.M. Thomas, it appears that Mamie had hooked herself up with quite a character, a man perhaps not a whole lot different from her father. He wasn't a musician, but his profession did involve saloons. Elijah's 1916 obituary labeled him
a prominent liquor man.
with a lengthy career in what today would be called the hospitality trade. Surely, at the time of their marriage, Mamie had thought him Mr. Right, and he might well have been because they were married for 15 years. Early in her life as Mrs. E.M. Thomas, Mamie lived in San Francisco because Elijah was a bartender at the city's prestigious Occidental Hotel on Montgomery Street, among the few luxury hotels in the city that catered to wealthy travelers. After a few years, Elijah Thomas moved his family from San Francisco to the town of Sonora. So once again, Mamie found herself back in the Sierra foothills. But this town was a move up from Volcano. In Sonora, Elijah leased and managed the Hotel Victoria, which was more of a boarding house than a traveler's hotel. A featured dish on the hotel's restaurant menu was
oysters in any style,
which presumably for this location far from the sea was a coy reference to mountain oysters, which is not a seafood, but a dish made of fried bull's testicles. Now, I assume Mamie continued to live in Sonora at least until 1902, as that was the year her daughter married in Sonora. But after that, the next institutional record involving Mamie indicates a dramatic change in her life. In 1903, now Mamie was alone, living in San Francisco, and the Chronicle newspaper reported that she had again filed for divorce. Mamie was then a 41-year-old woman whose only child was grown and married. And it was in San Francisco that Mamie finally found and married Mr. Right, or at least her last husband. Born in San Francisco, Meyer Jacobs was a prominent lawyer, a graduate of the University of California at Berkeley and New York's Columbia Law School. He was newly widowed and childless. I so wish that somewhere, hidden amongst institutional documents, would lie a hint of how these two people from such disparate backgrounds met and formed an attachment. A conjecture that brings a smile is to think that maybe Meyer Jacobs might have been Mamie's divorce lawyer. However it happened, these two did meet, and in August of 1904, just 1 month after her last divorce was granted, Mamie and Meyer married. Mamie was 41 years old, and Meyer was 47 years old. Sometime before 1907, Mamie and Meyer Jacobs built or bought a large home at the corner of Throckmorton and Elma Avenues, and she joined the Outdoor Art Club. During her presidency, our club's importance was acknowledged when the Mill Valley Record gave over its March 27, 1915 issue to the women of the OAC who wrote and edited all of it. The ladies used this opportunity to write columns informing their readers of many issues of concern. They also reminded readers of the Panama Pacific World's Fair, then in progress, with a lengthy column by Mamie explaining
California and its counties at the exposition.
But a huge concern of the women in March of 1915 was what was happening in Europe.
How much happier are we women of the OAC in using our pens than our poor sisters across the sea, who today are living under the dominion of the sword? In our land of peace, we are sitting on our vine-covered porches in the sweet morning sunshine of California, writing our thoughts, while in Europe, many a woman is following the plow because war has mowed down her father, husband, or son.
The town's war concerns grew when in April of 1917, the US sent soldiers to France. Mamie predictably became involved. But how could women help the war effort? Founded at the same time as the American doughboys were being sent into Europe, the Women's Council of National Defense advised their male counterpart on ways women could help. They especially embraced the food conservation program of the newly created U.S. Food Administration, which was established to ensure adequate food supplies for our troops and war-torn Europe. Herbert Hoover was the food administrator. One goal was to stabilize the price of wheat. Concepts such as meatless Mondays or wheatless Wednesdays were implemented to help ration food. Women's clubs served a crucial role in implementing food conservation. Through 3 separate drives in the summer of 1917 and 18, nearly 500,000 club women signed Hoover pledge cards promising to conserve food. But at the grass level, why did those drives succeed? Mamie Jacobs was one local reason. How do I know? The following letter, addressed to the town's women, appeared on the front page of the August 18th, 1917 Mill Valley Record.
Housewives, listen. Have you signed the Hoover Food Pledge? If not, why not? Sign a food pledge and live up to it, and you will render a valuable service to your country. Mr. Hoover wants every woman in the U.S. to enlist as a member of the Food Administration Army. He wants the name and address of every householder. Every woman who signs the food pledge will receive a placard of honor to be displayed in her window, and it will be most necessary for every house to display this placard to avoid persistent visits from Boy Scouts to know why. These boys will not miss a window. If you have not signed, phone your chairman and she will be only too glad to call or send you a pledge card. Town Chairman for Mill Valley, Mrs. Meyer Jacobs.
The next week's paper published another notice from Mamie, one a little less threatening and more helpful. Chairman Jacobs announced that every housewife was invited to attend a demonstration by an expert from UC Berkeley on how to can fruits and vegetables. And I'm struck by the relevance of this 1917 poster, which was created to help the war effort. A century later, we realize its advice should be followed for environmental reasons.
Food. Buy it with thought, cook it with care, use less wheat and meat, buy local foods, serve just enough, use what is left, don't waste it.
Soon after the Great War ended, Mamie was widowed, but she carried on her community volunteering, transferring her fervent activism in a surprising way. She was the OAC representative in a group of 3 women who in 1922 ardently petitioned the Marin County Board of Supervisors for a solution to what they perceived as
the dance hall menace.
It appears that several small commercial establishments near the area's many trails were hospitable to hikers and visitors. One spot of local concern was
Joe's Place on the Dipsy Trail, right at the mouth of Muir Woods Canyon, the oldest dance hall in this region.
What did the ladies want?
We desire to abolish the dance halls altogether because of the hazard to young people on the trails. It is best that the dancing feature of their business be abolished altogether, as young people in a state of intoxication have repeatedly been seen returning from the Dipsy Trail.
Now, exactly what motivated 60-year-old Mamie's fervent activism on the
dance hall menace?
In the newspaper's lengthy account of that county supervisor's meeting, it is not crime that has her exercised. It is
young people in a state of intoxication.
Now, surely she did not think that dancing caused intoxication. Alcoholic beverages, liquor, is necessary. And ironically, Mamie had 15 years of lived experience with a
prominent liquor man.
Now, was her stance here simply that of a conservative older woman, or perhaps somehow a lingering consequence of her marriage to Elijah Thomas? We shall never know. In 1938, Mamie Irene Neely Jacobs, age 76, died almost 20 years after Meyer's death. What are we to make of the reality that her husband had been honored with a lengthy eulogy when he died, one that described him as
public-spirited, upright, dependable?
This obituary reported
The sad word was received in Mill Valley with profound sorrow and with a general feeling of loss to the community.
However, not a word was published about Mamie's death. Public recognition of female leadership was not yet an accomplishment of the women's movement. So, now you know a bit about 3 ladies of substance. But my book contains a lot more interesting details about Carrie, Jula, and Mamie, as well as a lot of fascinating stuff about 11 other women. Now, Melissa and I are not going to publish and sell this. Rather, it'll probably be in a couple of binders available in our archives for you to check out. But here are a few hints about what a reader will find. This is so good. In a much publicized divorce trial of one OAC president, not Mamie, the evidence of adultery submitted openly to the court was described in the paper thusly: for sheer fervency of feelings, the songs of Solomon are frozen puddings compared to these love letters. I knew that was great.
The children of our first OAC president, who were featured in a front-page San Francisco News article detailing how an older boy undoubtedly saved the lives of little Eddie and Winston Davis, who were cornered by a fighting rattlesnake this afternoon.
Front page. Detailed reporting about one OAC president's husband who was part of a group that imported 40 pairs of songbirds, skylarks, finches, thrushes, and then set them free, expecting them to fill the woods above Mill Valley with their many warblings. All these compelling stories will soon be available for your reading pleasure. But why read them? We are so fortunate to be members of this 122-year-old organization. All our work today to keep it all going is deepened when we carry in our memory knowledge of the women who left us this legacy. Thank you.
Thank you.